do you mean by nothing? Phyllis asked. You refuse to carry or care for your child, and you call that nothing? Your own child, Jane. Jane's eyes flashed in a cold fire. Don't patronize me, Felix, she snapped. I've never wanted that child. It's yours. It was you who wanted her. She's your child, not mine. Felix and Jane had just gotten married. The couple loved each other so much, but then it seemed that Jane loved her husband a little too much. She was obsessed with him, so obsessed that she always wanted to be around him wherever he went, at every time of the day. Of course, except to work. Felix was a lover boy at heart, and so he enjoyed the kind of love and attention he got from his wife. When his friends wanted to tease him, they would call him Jane's baby. But then, Jane's suffocating love did not bother Felix until 1 year into their marriage, when they started talking about making babies. Jane categorically made it clear to him that she did not want children. Baby, she said, I want us to just focus on ourselves. Children are just distractions. I want us to just love and care for each other, she said. Her words struck Felix like a bolt of lightning. They had never discussed children during their courtship. He had simply assumed they both wanted them. I mean, that was what every normal couple did. Jane, he said, his voice soft but confused. It's not normal for a married couple not to have children. I want us to have a big family. Jane did not argue. She simply smiled, her demeanor as warm as ever. But behind that smile was a plan she had carefully crafted. Unbeknownst to Felix, she had been secretly taking morning after pills after they made love, ensuring that no baby would interrupt their idyllic life. She was meticulous, always hiding the pills in a small white bottle tucked away in their bathroom drawer. For months, Felix remained blissfully unaware. He soon began to notice peculiarities. After their intimate moments, Jane would often rush to the bathroom, claiming she needed to freshen up. One evening, curiosity got the better of him. He quietly followed her and watched as she swallowed a tiny white pill. In that moment, everything clicked. Anger bubbled inside him, but Felix chose not to confront her immediately. Instead, he devised his own plan. On his way home from work the next day, Felix bought a bottle of white vitamin C tablets. That evening, when Jane wasn't looking, he swapped the pills in her secret stash. Jane, none the wiser, continued her routine, working so hard not to get pregnant, while Felix silently waited for nature to take its course, each one pretending as if everything was okay. 6 months later, the inevitable happened. Jane missed her period for the first time in her life. The news hit her like a thunderbolt. I'm not keeping this child, she declared, her voice trembling with fury. Felix, unequally determined, shot back. No, you won't. This is my child too. The argument escalated into a full-blown war, drawing in both families in an attempt to mediate. But Jane was unyielding. She refused to embrace the idea of motherhood. It was not until Felix, in a moment of raw desperation, threatened to divorce her, that she reluctantly agreed to keep the baby. Even then, her heart remained cold. She secretly wished for a miscarriage, but fate had other plans. When their daughter Kainene was born, Felix was overjoyed. She was a perfect bundle of life, with rosy cheeks and curious eyes that seemed to take in the world. Felix held her with tears of joy, but Jane remained distant. She refused to touch the baby or even look at her. This continued until it was time to go home, but then, even there, the situation got worse. Jane refused to breastfeed Kainene, leaving Felix to take on the role of both parents. Night after night, he cradled his crying daughter. He had to feed her from a bottle since the mother had refused to feed her, whispering words of comfort. One day, overwhelmed and exhausted, he decided to confide in his best friend Ekene. "I'm tired," Felix admitted, his voice heavy with frustration. "I've never seen a mother hate her child so much. I don't know what to do anymore." Ekene sighed, shaking his head sadly. "This is really worrisome. But how come you both did not discuss this when you were dating? Anyway, I think you both should talk about it. Ask her why she feels this way. I'm sure she has good reasons." Felix nodded, realizing that Ekene was right. He decided to take his friend's advice. Perhaps it would help him understand his wife better, and maybe they could go back to the way they used to be. Unfortunately, the conversation did not go the way Felix had hoped. Jane's response to his carefully worded questions was infuriatingly simple and devoid of emotion. "Nothing," she said flatly, crossing her arms as if to shield herself from him. "What do you mean by nothing?" Felix asked, trying desperately to keep his temper in check. "You refuse to carry or care for your child, and you call that nothing? Your own child, Jane." His voice quivered, caught between anger and disbelief. Jane's eyes flashed in a cold fire. "Don't patronize me, Felix," she snapped. "I've never wanted that child. It's yours. It was you who wanted her. She's your child, not mine." Felix was stunned. Her words cut deep, like a blade to his heart. But he sensed there was more behind her anger, something she was not telling him. In truth, it wasn't nothing. Jane's hostility towards Kainene had roots buried deep in her past. As an only child, she had grown up in a household devoid of warmth and affection. Her parents were wealthy, successful, and perpetually busy. They saw her as a minor inconvenience, someone to be managed rather than cherished. From the tender age of 5, Jane had been placed in a boarding school, her parents too preoccupied to raise her themselves. The holidays, which should have been a time for family bonding, were spent with a nanny, while her parents traveled for work or leisure. To her, love had always been conditional and distant, something to be earned but never freely given. She had grown up feeling like an afterthought, a distraction her parents resented. The loneliness of her childhood shaped her deeply, leaving her with a fear of being unloved and unwanted. It was not until she met Felix that she finally understood what it felt like to be truly cared for, to be truly loved. Felix's warmth and devotion filled a void she hadn't realized was so immense. He became her anchor, her everything, and now the idea of sharing him with anyone even their own child, terrified her. She was consumed by a desperate need to keep his love undivided, to ensure that no one, not even Kainene, could come between them. But how could she explain that to him? How could she admit that her resistance to motherhood wasn't just about children? It was about the fear of losing the only real love she had ever known. Jane buried these deep thoughts, refusing to give Felix the truth. She did not want him to think she was broken or abnormal, even though she often felt that way herself. Instead, she lashed out, her words sharper than she had intended, hoping they would silence him. That night, Felix lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. For the first time, he saw the full extent of Jane's resentment towards Kainene. It was more than indifference. It was a raw, visceral hatred that he hadn't fully grasped until now. He turned over her words in his mind, dissecting them, trying to make sense of her anger. He wished desperately that he had known how Jane felt about children before they had gotten married. How could they have been together for years and never touched on such an important topic? Perhaps if he had known, he might have made a different choice. Perhaps he would have walked away, as painful as that thought was. But even as regrets gnawed at him, one thing remained certain. He could never regret Kainene. She was his child, his precious daughter, and he would love her fiercely even if Jane couldn't or wouldn't. Days turned into years, and baby Kainene blossomed into a strikingly beautiful and intelligent young girl. Kainene and Felix became inseparable. She adored her father, and he, in turn, cherished her with all his heart. They shared secrets, laughter, and countless moments that made their relationship more like best friends than father and child. There was nothing Kainene could not tell her father, and Felix found immense pride and joy in being her confidant. But while their bond flourished, Jane's bitterness festered. She watched from the shadows as father and daughter grew closer with each passing day, her heart sinking deeper into resentment. Her worst fears had come true. The love Felix once showed on her had shifted entirely to their daughter. She felt invisible, unwanted, and utterly alone in her marriage. The once sweet and tender relationship between she and her husband had soared between recognition. Where there used to be love, there was now tension and silence. Jane's frustration bubbled over, and she began nagging incessantly. Felix, weary from years of emotional strain, stopped trying to placate her. He found excuses to stay away from home, and before any one of them knew what was happening, the warmth that once defined their marriage had turned to cold ashes. Jane's bitterness grew, and it found an easy target: Kainene. She poured out all her anger and frustration on the girl. In her mind, the little girl was the root of all her misery, the thief who had stolen her husband's affection. Her hatred for the girl grew darker and more consuming with each passing day. She could not stand the sight of her daughter. She could not stand the sight of the girl's radiant smile, or the way Felix's eyes lit up when he looked at her. To Jane, Kainene was a constant reminder of what she had lost. She snapped at the girl every single minute of the day, and at the slightest provocation, especially when her father was not around, she flogged Kainene mercilessly, threatening to do worse if she ever said anything to her father. The girl kept everything bottled up in her mind. She so desperately wanted her mother to love her, but she soon realized that her mother was not capable of loving. Felix, on the other hand, endured his crumbling marriage for one reason alone: his daughter. He wanted Kainene to grow up in a stable home, even if the foundation of that home was fractured beyond repair. He shielded her as best as he could from Jane's hostility. They quarreled every other day, and most of the time it was about their daughter. Jane, in her cruelty, pushed Felix further away, unknowingly tightening this very cycle of loneliness she feared most. As the days continued to pass, Kainene, for some reason, started veering towards puberty at a very tender age. By the time she was 7, she had started to develop little breasts on her chest, and by the time she was 9, she experienced the first symbol of womanhood. The day her period came, she ran to her mother with fear, but Jane paid no attention to her. Instead, she dismissed her, called her a spoiled child, and accused her of stealing her husband's love and destroying their family. That day was the worst day of Kainene's life. She vowed never to tell her mother anything again or even talk to her. The little girl had no idea what to do. She went to school the next day, and a teacher saw her blood-stained uniform and quickly cornered her. It was that teacher who taught her all she needed to know about menstruation and how to care for herself. Each day, Kainene tiptoed around the house, trying to avoid her mother's piercing glares and hurtful words. She sought solace in the arms of her father, who provided a sanctuary of love and understanding whenever he was around. Unfortunately for the two women, the family will suffer a big blow. Felix went to work one day and never came back. He was involved in a ghastly motor accident, which took his life on the spot. His death broke his wife completely. She had finally lost everything, and the one thing she loved most in life. She became depressed more than she had ever been. For despite the rift between the both of them, she still loved him deeply. She cried non-stop for days. Death had indeed dealt her a big blow. As for Kainene, even as a little girl, she understood that she was not going to see her daddy anymore. Her life had lost its meaning, but she had mastered the art of burying her grief. So once more, she buried her grief and recoiled into her shell. Her father's death caused a bigger rift between her and her mother. Jane now threw herself into her work and buried herself deeply, so deeply that she totally abandoned her daughter to fend for herself. She managed to prepare her food and provide her basic needs, but there was still no relationship whatsoever between the mother and her daughter. The poor girl could not comprehend why her mother hated her so much. In the same compound where Kainene and her mother lived, also lived Chike, who the whole neighbors usually called Uncle Chike, for he was in his late 40s. But Uncle Chike had no wife or children. He used to be close friends with Felix when he was around, and every now and then the two men enjoyed watching a football game together in Felix's sitting room. Uncle Chike loved to play with children, and the neighbors often teased him to get married and have his own children. But no one actually saw him for the snake he was. he was the typical wolf in sheep's clothing. After the death of Felix, Uncle Chike started visiting their home more frequently, especially whenever Jane was away. He would buy things for Kainene and offer comfort to her. The girl, who had turned 11 at this time, saw no harm in what he was doing. After all, he was her father's friend, and she had known him virtually all her life. Uncle Chike came as a saint. He would sit with the young girl and listen to her pour out her heart, after which he would often offer her words of comfort and sometimes even assist with her schoolwork. In no time, she began to feel comfortable around him. To her, it was as if the heavens had sent her a guardian angel. It was then that Uncle Chike knew that it was time for him to strike. All along, Uncle Chike only saw Kainene as another vulnerable little girl to prey on, and was only waiting for her to fully trust him. Then he would reveal his true self. One day, while Jane was away at work, he came to visit as usual under the guise of helping her with her schoolwork. After her homework was completed, he asked her to sit on his lap. This was quite uncomfortable for the little girl, but she thought she had nothing to fear, so she obliged. He started to touch her hair as he said to her, "Kainene, do you know that I really care about you?" She had a strange feeling that something was off, but she nodded in affirmation. He asked again, "Has anyone ever told you that you're a beautiful girl?" She looked at him and burst into tears. "My daddy," she replied in tears. She began to cry uncontrollably. He tried to comfort her, touching every private part of her body. The girl became confused and afraid. "What are you doing, uncle?" she asked, perplexed. "Shh, just be quiet. I want to show you something, you will enjoy it. I promise you." "No, uncle, please, I beg you, don't touch me." She knelt down, crying and begging, but Uncle Chike would not listen. He had gone far. His eyes no longer looked the same as she looked into them. She knew she was already done for. Fear gripped her as he carried her and covered her mouth to stop her from screaming and alerting the neighbors. He threatened to kill her with a little knife which he brought out of his pocket if she did not keep quiet. Hearing this, she became calm as he took off her clothes and forcefully took away her innocence. The poor girl lay there crying and shivering uncontrollably. Afterwards, he gently cleaned her up with a towel and water to avoid her mother seeing any stain or traces of blood. After all was done, he took her to her room, carrying her like a baby in his arms, and began to pet her. He promised to always be there for her and take care of her. With a kiss to her forehead, he bid her a good night and left. After he had gone, Kainene cried her eyes out, for even as young as she was, she knew that this was wrong. But it pained her the more because she had no one to talk to about it. She was in this state when her mother came home from work. That day at the office, something extraordinary happened. Jane's friend and colleague, Abigail, had sat her down and talked to her about her relationship with her daughter. She made Jane to understand that Kainene was all that she had left in the world, and she was the only piece of her husband that she had left with her. Abigail talked for a long time, to the point that Jane began to shed tears. For the first time since the birth of her daughter, she actually opened up to someone as to how she truly felt. Abigail did not judge her.
I understand how you feel, Jane, Abigail said. But you must face your demons. Your parents were not right to treat you the way they did. But that should be the more reason you should love your child and give her the love your parents could not give you. You were scared of losing your husband, losing his love, and then you deprived yourself of having his love and the love of your child altogether. She looked into Jane's eyes deeply. If you continue this way, you will end up alone and unhappy forever. Fix this before it's too late. As Jane stood by her daughter's bed looking down at her innocent form, she thought that perhaps Abigail was right. But the problem still remained that she had no idea how to love this child or how to even begin to show her love. They had no bond, and so many years had gone by. Still holding that thought, she went into her room to rest. But that night she could not sleep. She tossed and turned all night. She made up her mind that night to become nicer to her daughter. Perhaps they could build something from there. The next morning, Jane got up earlier than usual and went straight into Kainene's room. Kainene looked up at her mother and wondered what she had committed this time around. Surprisingly, Jane walked to her bed and sat down for the first time since she could remember. When Jane looked into her daughter's eyes, they were ice cold, emotionless. She knew that Kainene was afraid of her and probably disliked her. But what she saw in her eyes that morning was no fear. It was pure hatred and a deep sadness. Jane hated herself for the way she had treated the girl and silently prayed in her heart that it was not too late. For Kainene, it was already too late. After what happened yesterday, the only feeling she had in her was hate, and she vowed never to speak to her mother ever again. After a fruitless attempt to talk to her daughter, Jane decided to leave her alone, but she promised herself to keep trying to make things right, no matter how long it would take. And try she did, but no matter how she tried, Kainene was not budging. She did not disrespect her mother. She did not rebel. She just acted as if the woman did not exist. As the days went by, Uncle Chike continued to come to the house, except on the days Jane was home. Soon the neighbors began to talk, and it got to Jane's ears. Jane confronted the man, but he said he only visited to help her with her schoolwork. She confronted Kainene too, but the girl only confirmed what Uncle Chike had said earlier. Still, Jane was not comfortable with his presence in her house with her daughter, so she asked him to stop coming. But then things had already gone too far. Kainene had no friends in school. She always kept to herself. The death of her father actually made it worse. She totally recoiled into her shell and shut the door. The closest person to her was Uncle Chike, and somehow she had begun to enjoy the other things he did to her. 2 days after her mother stopped him from coming to their home, Kainene was unable to concentrate. She needed to see him, and she wanted him to touch her just like he always did. The girl had become addicted to the things they did together, even though she was only 12 years old at the time. When she could not hold it anymore, she began to sneak to his house every day. Days turned into months. Months turned into years, and Kainene grew into a beautiful teenager. But her shenanigans with Uncle Chike continued. She knew that what she was doing was wrong. She knew that what she was doing was dangerous, but she could not stop. She had tried severally to stop, but she found herself going back every time. Jane, on the other hand, had no success with patching things up with her daughter. In fact, the more she tried, the more she was shut out. But she would not stop trying. After all, how hard could it be to deal with a 15-year-old? Things continued this way until one day, Jane came home to meet the house in darkness. She thought about where Kainene could be. Then she heard it. A cry of pain was coming out from the bathroom. She rushed in. It was Kainene, lying in the pool of her own blood and crying in severe pain. Jane ran and asked what was going on. All Kainene could say was, "It's Uncle Chike," and then she passed out. Jane could not understand, but she knew that she needed to rush her to the hospital immediately. She tried to lift her up, but her weight was too much, so she ran out to get the neighbors to help her. When they reached the hospital, she was already unconscious as she had lost a lot of blood. After an examination, the doctors tried to stop the bleeding. Her blood was pumping uncontrollably. But 15 minutes after she was brought in there, they were finally able to control it. But she needed blood transfusion immediately. Few hours later, after Kainene was stable, with her friend Abigail by her side, the doctor revealed to Jane that after examination, it was discovered that Kainene had just had an abortion. Apparently, the doctor said, it's not the first time, and her uterus has been severely affected. We are hoping the damage would not warrant taking out her womb entirely. Jane screamed in shock. She remembered the last thing Kainene had said before she passed out earlier. She remembered the rumors circulating, what the neighbors had told her. Her head sparked. In a fit of rage, she ran home straight to Uncle Chike's apartment. "You filthy animal," she shouted in anger, throwing herself at him. "You have finished me. You could not control that nonsense between your legs. Now my daughter is lying in the hospital, fighting for her life. What kind of evil person are you?" She ranted angrily, but he totally denied everything. This made Jane even angrier. She came out and started shouting until people gathered. She dragged him by the trouser and started telling all that had gathered what had happened. At first, it was hard to believe, but after she told them her daughter's last words, coupled with the rumors circulating years ago, the young men did not wait. Angrily, they started beating him mercilessly until he confessed all that he had done to Kainene. He told them how he started taking advantage of the girl since she was 11. He admitted to taking her to a small clinic where he had forced her to terminate a pregnancy 4 times. The crowd went wild and the young men resumed beating him. They beat him beyond recognition. On hearing his confession, Jane collapsed and had to be rushed to the hospital. When Jane regained consciousness, Abigail was sitting beside her. She burst into fresh tears as she remembered all that had happened. "This is my fault, Abigail. I failed that girl. I have failed as a wife, and I have failed as a mother," she cried. "It's never too late to start again," Abigail said as she confronted Jane. When Jane went in to see her daughter, Kainene was already awake. The girl burst into tears as she saw her mother. Jane rushed forward and took her daughter in her arms. "I'm so sorry, my baby," Jane cried. "This is all my fault. I should have been there for you. I should have been the mother you deserve. Please forgive me. I promise to be there for you till the day that I die." Mother and daughter cried together until their tears dried and there was none to shed anymore. Kainene had come face to face with death and survived. She had gotten a second chance to live, and she was not about to live with it with a heart filled with hate. A new chapter had opened for the two women, though they were both scarred. Yet, they were willing to begin this new journey together in love. Luckily for Kainene, her womb did not have to be removed, but she had to be careful going forward, else she may never be able to carry a child of her own. As for Uncle Chike, the news exposed all his secret activities, and some other girls living under the fear he had suppressed their voices with came out and exposed all the things he had been doing. Kainene was painfully not the only one he was abusing. There were so many other girls, some even below the ages of 10. With all the evidence gathered against him, Uncle Chike was arrested and tried, after which he was sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison. Hey lovers, thank you for listening to this story. If you are new here, welcome to our community. I hope you enjoyed listening to this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If you have not done so already, please hit the subscribe button, and to support the growth of our community, give this video a big thumbs up. If you know someone who would enjoy a story like this, do not hesitate to share. Don't forget to leave a comment down below. Remember, like, share, drop a comment and subscribe. I'll take my leave now, but I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.